You need to be accountable to your actions. And
Mhm.
I think that's very important. I think a lot of people today don't have a plan of action or are not accountable to themselves, and those are the things that are holding them back.
Hey everybody, James Shepard here. I'd like to welcome you to another edition of the Merchant Sales Podcast. Today we got an awesome episode for you, talking to Gus Torres, industry veteran, been around for a long time, started as an individual agent and now has his own ISO. And so he's also associated with Netevia. Netevia is the sponsor of the podcast. And so I always like to clarify that. But Gus has just a great story and just a really positive person, a goal setter. So we talk about kind of more the nuts and bolts of how to make that transition from agent into ISO. We also have today for you a lot of really interesting industry updates. The Credit Card Competition Act has been another big push for that. BNPL, some changes in the UK and regulations. And so a lot of really interesting things to take a look at today. So with that being said, let's dive into this episode and this interview with Gus Torres. Hey everybody, I'm here with longtime industry veteran and CEO at Netevia Platinum, Gus Torres today. How you doing today, Gus?
Great. How you doing, James? Thank you for having me.
Absolutely, man. It's great to have you on the podcast. So Gus and I have kind of known each other off and on for a long time, and Gus, I know you have quite a story. So I thought maybe before we dive into talking about scaling ISOs, tell us your story a little bit. How did you get into this crazy industry, and what's your journey been like getting to the point where you're at today?
Yeah, it's a pretty interesting story. I've been in the industry going on 28 years.
Wow, that's awesome.
Um, yeah, and I wasn't looking to get into this industry. Pretty much the industry pretty much fell in my lap.
Right,
I was working for a bank in New York, selling a payroll service, and we weren't able to compete against the ADPs and the paychecks of the world.
right,
And one day we all walk into the office, and there's like three guys in suits sitting there, and they call us into a conference room and they tell us, "What do you want? What do you want to hear, guys? Good news or bad news?" And we all said we want to hear the bad news first. And the guy, his name was Florian. I don't know if you know him, but I actually bumped into him again at the West Coast show about 2 years ago. It was great
really,
seeing him.
yeah,
Yeah, and he goes, guys, the bad thing is that you guys are no longer selling payroll service. And then he goes into a box and he takes out a T7P and he brings it out and he goes, as of today, you're selling merchant services and your training starts, and you still have your job, you still have your salary and blah, blah, blah. And
right.
that was my introduction. I worked
Wow,
there
that's crazy.
I continued to work there for another 6 months. And then I through some people who were working at the company, they pretty much told me about being an ISO, how much money you can make if are working on your own.
Right.
They introduced me to an ISO in New Jersey that really helped me a lot too, and that started my journey into the ISO world as an agent. Back then everything was leases. There was
Yep.
no pricing on interchange. It was going out there and selling a rate of 1.49 and 10 cents a transaction, 10 cents a transaction fee, and that was pretty much, you were off to the races.
Right. And you were just mostly making money. Back then, it was all about the leases. I kind of got in on the tail end of that, because I got in
Yeah.
about 17 years ago. So that was kind of the tail end of the leasing glory years.
Yeah. No, that was my start. And then, United Bank Card came out with the free terminals, North American Bank Card came out with the free terminals.
Right.
The pricing also changed.
Right.
Everybody started selling interchange.
Right.
So, the market, grew and everything changed, right?
Yeah.
The same way, debit cards came into the picture,
Right.
EMV then came into the picture down the line, right?
Sure.
And
Sure.
everything evolving into cash discount and POS sales and all the different
Right.
ISV things that are in the market today.
Yeah. So talk to us about Netevia a little bit. Obviously, Netevia, the parent company there, Netevia is the sponsor of the podcast. And of course, you're Netevia Platinum. So talk about how did that end up happening? How'd you get hooked up with Vlad there? And tell us about that story a little bit.
Yeah, that's it. I've been working with Vlad going on 18 years.
Oh,
Okay,
wow. That's awesome.
so
Okay.
how many people can actually say that they're working with the same partner going on 18 years, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's one of the things that I'm very appreciative, because when I met up with Vlad, right, it wasn't directly through him. It was through one of his recruiters, ironically,
Right.
who reached out to me in 2007 when I had just gotten back into the business after I had sold a couple books and got out of the business, and for a 2 year time period there.
Yeah.
And they recruited me to work at one of his companies in New York called NPS. I came in as an ISO, I had a big fire under me. I had a family, three kids, a lot of responsibilities.
Right.
And I went in there and became a top producer. And through that, I guess, he saw me on one of the lists as one of the top producers, and he reached out to me, and we started talking on a regular basis, meeting up with him when I went to New York. I even went to the office and met with him over there.
Yeah.
And he helped me, back then grow my business as an ISO. And then in about 2013, after I had really grown my books to a certain level and I was doing everything on my own, when you do something and you're just a one-man person, you could only go so far when you do things on your own.
Right.
And I had just purchased my house and, he came to my house and we were walking around. He goes, Gus, are you going to be an agent all your life? You can only, you need to start duplicating yourself.
Right.
So he walked me into, the recruiting world and the business development world.
Yeah.
And I started with that. And that there was a process. I was not successful when I first started. I really, really struggled for a whole year. And when I would meet with him on a monthly basis, I used to kick and scream in his office and say, this recruiting thing is no good. This sucks. I'm not making any money. I
Right.
want to go back into the streets and sell, but
Right.
I stuck with it. We came out with different programs,
Yeah.
and that led to me helping him grow to different ISOs in his business, to levels where they were producing pretty good app counts
Right.
on a monthly basis.
Yeah.
And then down the road that led to me opening up what I'm doing now at Netevia Platinum and
That's
running my
great.
own shop.
That's great.
Yeah,
So,
he's been a mentor to me the whole time.
yeah, Vlad's fantastic. I love working with Vlad. I actually just talked to him a couple hours ago, and yeah,
Yeah.
he's great. So, all right, so let's shift gears here. Let's talk about scaling an ISO. Clearly, you've got some experience in this area. I want to start though at kind of the beginning of the journey because I think a lot of people come into the business and they want to start at the finish line, and you got to start at the starting line, right? You got to understand the business. Talk about the importance in your mind of like when somebody gets into this industry, the importance of them actually getting out on the streets or on the phones and actually like calling and making sales. How big of a role did that play in your success that you had that experience early on?
Look, you got to start by doing something, right? The way you learn everything is through action. You got to be willing to fail.
Yeah.
And like I mentioned before, when I was an ISO and I was out there selling, I walked into a whole bunch of businesses. I didn't know what I was saying. I didn't know what I was doing.
Right.
But you know what? I had a big dream. I had a big why, and those are the things that helped me adjust. And I really got into self-education, making myself better.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that I pride myself on because at this level, I'm still working on making myself better. My goal is to make myself, 1% better every day, learn something new,
Yeah.
sharpen my tools. And those are all things that helped me when I started going out there and talking to people.
Yeah.
And that also helped because it helped me be able to communicate better. It helped me to be able to sell better. It helped me to
Mm.
become a better listener. Because when you're out there talking to people, it's very important to ask a lot of questions, see where people are at, see what their needs are.
Yeah.
Because I think any relationship that you come into in business, it has to be a win-win, right?
Right.
So you got to look for a win-win situation and look for a relationship where they're getting a good value from what you bring into them, and you're also getting a good value
Yeah. Yeah.
for bringing them
Absolutely.
as a client. So a win-win situation is ideally where you want to be, and that's pretty much what I do now. As an
Right.
ISO, I talk to a lot of people, and not everybody that I talk to, is a fit to work with us, and not every, sometimes a lot of times when you speak to somebody for their first time, it's also not the right time. A lot of the
Right.
people who are on my team now started with a conversation that I've had with them maybe 2, 3 years ago,
Right.
and then when the time was right, it led to us doing business.
Right, exactly. So for that agent that's out there right now, and maybe they're newer to the industry, they're putting maybe a deal or two a month right through. You mentioned about kind of always learning and having that mindset of learning and self-improvement. You also mentioned the importance of listening. What are the other tips that you would give that agent that's like, hey, I'm doing one or two, maybe three deals a month. I'd really like to get to 10 or 15 or 20. What in your experience, what are those agents usually missing, or what are the tips that you give them to help them improve and grow?
What are your daily activities, right? For me, I still write down every day what I do. Ever
Mm,
since I was an agent, I have notebooks
wow.
here.
Yep.
for, probably the last 15, 20 years. I can go in and tell you how many cold calls I made, on a certain week in 2010 or in 2011, right? Or now that I'm
That's
recruiting, how
great.
many ISO agreements I sent out in a certain week,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
So I believe, developing a method for yourself where you're accountable to yourself, right?
Sure.
You need to be accountable to your actions. And
Mm,
I think that's very important. I think a lot of people today don't have a plan of action, are not accountable to themselves, and those are the things that are holding them back.
mm, yeah.
Setting goals for yourself daily, of what it is you want to accomplish. How many, if you're a new business, if you're new to the business, you got to say to yourself, how many people am I going to be talking to today? How many phone calls am I going to make? How many cold calls am I going to make? How
Right.
many business owners do I want to talk to today? How many appointments do I want to make? Those type of things.
Yeah. I love the idea of writing it down too. I love that. I feel like when I'm keeping track of my time and writing things down, there's no hiding. You don't want to, it's like you don't want to lie to yourself, right? Because you get to the
Yeah,
end of the day and you're kind of like, oh, boy, that seemed like a productive day. And then it's like, okay, write it down. And then when you actually go to write it down and you realize, well, actually, that really wasn't a very productive day. I didn't get anything done hardly, or didn't get anything important done. I was just busy all day. There's no hiding. When you write stuff down, I think it kind of forces you to really confront what you're actually accomplishing versus what you're just pretending to accomplish.
absolutely. Like we said, like I mentioned before, accountability to self. You write it down. If things aren't going, I know many times when things aren't really going as like I want, I go look at my actions and I say, all right, I wasn't doing this, I wasn't doing this. So
Yep.
I know the things that I automatically need to correct to get myself back on track.
Yeah, I love it. All right, so we talked about that individual agent as we're kind of progressing through this idea of scaling an ISO. Let's move to the next level. So you mentioned the conversation with Vlad where he's like, "Hey, you got to duplicate yourself." So let's talk about if I'm an agent, I'm a little more experienced. I want to start adding agents in that I can train, that I can work with, and kind of duplicate myself in that way. What are some of the big mistakes that you see these agents making when they try to make that transition? I know a lot of agents that have tried and failed to make this transition. What are the big mistakes that they make in your experience?
Well, look, I'll talk to you about pretty much my own mistakes that I've made, right?
Sure.
And I made a ton of them. And when I started my ISO and I didn't have all the resources that I have now, I struggled because I didn't have a training program. I didn't have a marketing program. I didn't have the proper support. I was a one-man shop. I was doing everything on my own. And I think that's the biggest problem that ISOs have when they're trying to grow, right? Some of them are just trying to do everything on their own, and they just don't have the width to be able to grow because they don't have the resources, right?
Yeah.
So I believe, looking for a partner that'll help you with those things that you don't currently have is
Yeah.
very important. And those are the type of things that are attracting, partners to us. The resources that we have, the things that we do for our partners,
Right.
the training that we do weekly trainings for our new partners. We just had a training at Netevia Corp about 2 or 3 weeks ago, our first one for the quarter. We had over 20 partners showed up who paid their own way and came down to Miami
Yeah.
to meet the team, to meet the people in the different departments and risk, customer service, deployment, the POS, and meet us face to face, right? And be
Right.
able to talk and have conversations and grow and develop those relationships.
Mm,
I think those are very big and important things in helping to grow your business.
mm. Yeah, I love that. So basically what you're saying is that, and I see this so much, it's like, if you're growing your business, especially early on, you don't have the resources, you don't have maybe even the expertise to do a lot of these things. And so you're faced with this dilemma because it's like, okay, well, I need to hire 10 people. And it's like, well, I can't hire 10 people. I don't have enough money to hire 10 people.
Right.
So what do you do? And that's where those partnerships become really, really important because you need to find those partners that have those resources that can, because, you might need, like a common thing would be, think about it from a marketing perspective, it's like, well, you don't need to hire a marketing person full time. You need a little bit of marketing, or you don't need a full time equipment deployment team. You need a company that can deploy, 4 or 5 terminals a week. So,
Right.
so it doesn't make sense. You don't have enough scale for it to make sense for you to build out that channel. What should people be looking for? I know you guys do a lot of these partnerships. I mean, what should a small ISO that's looking to grow and scale, they don't have those resources. What should they be looking for? How do they identify a good partner versus somebody that's gonna, because a lot of times people will talk a big game and then they don't come through on it. So how do you advise them to really find good partnerships?
Well, I highly recommend them to first, get a piece of paper and write down what are the things that are important to them. For every ISO, there's different things
Mm,
that are important to them,
right.
right? I'll give you an example. One of our most recent, partnerships that we formed, they needed somebody who can help them out with POSs. They didn't have a partner that had access to different POS solutions. And when they came to us, we have a POS department. We have a department where, you come across a merchant, you can send an email to our POS department, and a person who has over 15 years experience in the POS world is gonna, get in contact with that merchant and find out what it is the business is looking for as far as solutions. For example, you have a meat market or a liquor store, right? They're
Mhm.
looking for a POS that has, the things that they need for that type of business. So we have somebody who can actually do a demo on POSs that can help them with those things. Like right now, one of our POSs that's we're getting a lot of traction on is Greta POS. It works great for meat markets, for liquor stores, for any markets stores with scales and stuff like that.
Right.
And we've helped a lot of partners sell big accounts. You're talking about merchants that are doing over $500,000 a month, $300,000 a month, and provide them with a solution that's going to meet all the demands that the merchant's looking for.
Mm,
And it's a win-win for the merchant,
right.
as an example.
Right. Yeah. And I think too, that's an interesting one to kind of get into because I think, as the industry continues to evolve more towards integrated payments, more complex solutions, I think partnership becomes even more important, right? Because it's like, you might be able to be a one-man show and get out there and sell terminals, or, maybe you can partner with Clover and do some Clover deals and things. But it's like when you get into these vertical specific POS deals and software companies, I mean, you need some help. I mean, there's a lot of complexity there that you're not going to learn how to demo 15 different point of sale systems as an individual, right?
Absolutely. And also, I think it's also important to focus on different verticals. Some people are
Right.
focused on the meat markets and the markets. Other people just focus on liquor stores. There's people who focus on, beauty salons. There's different POSs for different verticals. So
Right.
those are all the things that, you need to focus on,
Mm.
depending on what it is that you want to do.
Yeah. And it's like, I think partnership just becomes so crucial and all that, right? Because if I'm an individual agent and I'm in my local market, it's like if I want to go prospect in my local market, well, it used to be, when I started in the industry like 17 years ago, like you, it's like I had to understand a terminal. I'd understand, dial-up internet and baud rates and things like
Right.
that, but once I kind of knew that, right, then I kind of understood, what to do for most of the businesses in my area. I could go
Right.
sell pretty
Right.
much anybody with that knowledge. Well, now you walk down the street and it's like for me to get halfway down the street, I got to know seven different point of sale solutions or software solutions to provide the right service. And that's just not a reasonable expectation, you know?
Yeah. No, you're right. You're right.
Yeah.
Focusing on the verticals. I remember when I was out in the street, we all had our different verticals that we were good at. I was very good, at selling, auto mechanics, liquor stores, dry cleaners.
Hmm.
Those are the businesses that, I had a lot of success closing, and focusing on verticals is really for back then was the way to go, and now probably more than ever.
Yeah, now it's almost like a survival mechanism. It used to be the best agents were focused on certain verticals. Now it's
Hmm.
like the only agents that are successful are focused on certain verticals, it's or at least
Yep.
it's getting
Yep.
close to that point.
Yep. Yep.
Okay, so let's talk about kind of this next level. So where you're at now as far as like, man, you're, obviously recruiting ISOs, you're doing these, deals, and I'm sure got joint ventures and all kinds of stuff happening. When you're trying to get deals done, what are the keys? You mentioned win-win earlier. What are some of the other keys that you look for in negotiating these deals so that it's of interest to the other party, but also it's a good fit. Talk about that a little bit and how you think about doing these deal structure.
Well, the first thing you want to make sure is that everybody has the same energy, right?
Mm,
Not every sometimes when you talk to potential partners, their style of business doesn't connect with the way you do business, right?
yeah.
So, that's very important. Not everybody is going to be a fit. Uh, for you or even for them, when
Right.
they're looking for an ISO, right?
Right.
So I think that's very important, having the synergies and the energies that create that connection. I would think that's probably the most important thing.
Mm,
And number two, looking at what it is that you're looking for to help grow your ISO. There's people who need the proper support. They're not getting the correct support. So making sure that you have those people available to you to help you grow, and that the company that you're working with has those resources for you, that's very important, as well as tech support, as well as deployment, and even marketing, because, we even have a marketing department as well. So, having all those things are very important. And then also having differentiating products, and Netevia, we have products that, differentiate us from a lot of the other partners. We have, the banking product that has been great. A lot of our partners use it. A lot of our partners, when they sign up with us, open up their own bank account and start using their own debit cards. And a lot of the partners that are with us, I pay them residuals right through the Netevia banking as well. So,
right.
and they see the value in that, and they know that that's the way of the future. So, those are things that, that you want to look at.
Yeah, I want to go back to one thing you said. I really believe in. You're talking about the kind of energy that the other party brings. You know, I think when you're young and you get into business, you kind of in your mind are like, I just am looking to make money just any way I can, and I just want to be successful. And I think that it's early on, it's easy to imagine that like, man, I just want to say yes to everything and everybody. And the longer you're in business, the more you realize that's a recipe for failure. Um, right. I feel like it's so much more about what you're willing to say no to, what you're willing to sacrifice. It's about kind of saying, you know what, this deal looks great from a financial perspective, but I don't think I want to work with this person. And I don't think they want to work with me. Well, save yourself some time and some money and some heartache because it's not going to work. It doesn't matter how good the numbers look, right?
Absolutely, 100%. I
Yeah.
agree. You know, I've had those situations in the past, for myself, with partners, and I've also had that with merchants too. Sometimes there's certain merchants that is just, not the right energy.
Yeah.
Not everybody is going to be the right fit for you, and that's the beautiful thing about being in sales, right? We all have options. We all can choose who we do business with,
Right.
and we all can choose who we bring on as clients.
Yeah. Yeah, very true. Yeah, I love it. So, all right. So, last thing I want to do here. So, Gus, tell us a little bit about what kind of people are you looking for? Because we're just talking about that, right? What is the right energy, or what are the kind of people that fit the criteria that would be potentially a good fit for Netevia Platinum? And then also share with us where you would send them to reach out and learn more about partnering with you guys.
Look, we're looking for ISOs and agents who are looking to grow, who want to be part of a good culture, who have want to be part of a team. I pride myself and on our team in giving all of my partners the proper resources. All of my leadership team, we have a mastermind with a success coach that I've been using for the last 3 years that has helped me
Mm,
10x my business. Those are the differentiating things that I do for my partners. We're also doing it for our agents as well.
sure.
Doing weekly huddles, which is another thing that we're going to be doing for them as well. Um, we're looking for agents and ISOs who are looking to grow and want to 10x their business and want to grow with a company that has all of the technology solutions that are going to help them grow their business.
Sure. That's great. And where would you send them to reach out if they want to learn more?
They can reach out directly to myself, Gus T at nativiaplat.com. Um, you can also go to our website, nativiaplat.com. And you could also look me up on LinkedIn. I know a lot of people who probably who are going to see this get my messages on LinkedIn. I would say probably 99.9% of everybody that I've ever recruited who are part of my team has been through LinkedIn. So I'm very
Yeah.
active there as well.
Absolutely. You can look up Gus Torres on LinkedIn. He'll pop right up. So, Gus,
Yep.
so glad you were joining us today. I really appreciate your time, and I just appreciate you sharing your story and your wisdom with us today. So, thanks so much for taking the time.
No, thank you so much, James, for having me. I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
So, James, we're inching closer to Durban 2.0.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, the Senator Durbin and Roger Marshall, who's a Republican from Kansas, are planning to offer the Credit Card Competition Act as an amendment to the Genius Act.
What's the Genius Act?
The Genius Act, officially known as Guiding and Establishing National Innovation for U.S. Stablecoins Act. Don't you
Okay.
love the way they come up with these acronyms? I mean,
I mean, it's actually pretty impressive. I mean, not as impressive anymore because I'm sure they're using AI for it,
right?
but yeah, I mean, the thing I'm laughing about though is like, of course, that's where they should attach this new, credit card competition act
Right,
to the stable coin regulation. It's like,
right.
come on, guys.
Yeah, in the old days, we used to call these Christmas trees.
Hmm.
Um, so that the Genius Act aims to create the first comprehensive federal regulatory framework for stablecoins,
Okay.
which, as we've explained in the past, they're cryptocurrencies pegged to stable assets like the U.S. dollar.
Right.
So debate on the Genius Act ended on May 19th through a procedure known as cloture, passing on a 66 to 32 vote, which means it was bipartisan. A vote on the bill is expected once on the Senate floor once lawmakers return from the Memorial Day recess. Now, just to remind people, the Credit Card Competition Act would mandate that merchants be able to choose over which networks their payment card transactions get processed. To accommodate that, the largest issuers of cards, those with 100 billion in assets, would be required to program the cards they issue to be able to process on two networks, only one of which can be owned by Visa or MasterCard. The premise being that merchant choice would lower interchange rates as the networks compete for business. Now, the legislation has broad support from retailers, Republicans, Democrats in the House and Senate, and even Indian tribes. There was a
Hmm.
the this coalition of Indian Native Americans sent a letter to Congress, to uh, the heads, the minority and the majority leaders of the Senate,
Yeah.
ask, asking them to pass the legislation.
Hmm.
Now, the Merchant Payments Coalition claims that the act has support of almost 2,000 companies and nearly 300 trade associations, as well as a broad group of consumer, labor, and pro competition organizations. At a hearing last year called by Durbin, prominent Republican senators Lindsey Graham and Tom Tillis, who are both Republicans, chastised the card brands, with Tillis asserting that small businesses have a legitimate concern and, quote, if you don't figure that out, you're going to get Durbin Marshall.
Hmm. Wow.
So, so
I mean,
I mean,
as you know, this is probably my least favorite legislation from my entire lifetime so far.
so far, yeah, you got a ways to go.
I have a ways to go yet, but it's just awful.
Oh,
So
it is. It's and and the thing is that this is just like I said. It's inching closer. It's passed in the Senate. It still has to pass in the Genius Act with this amendment would still have to pass, and of course the amendment you know it may not make it in. You
right.
know the but if it does, it would then go to the House, and then it could be you know taken out by the House,
Yeah.
or it could be approved.
Well, and I think so for our listeners, just a real quick version of this, right? So the idea here is right now, if you have a Visa card and you run the transaction, it goes over the Visa network,
Right,
which makes sense.
right,
Um, I don't even know what something else would look like if it wasn't that. But the idea is that merchants have the ability to, when they run a Visa card, that merchant should be able to choose between two other networks where they can send that transaction. So calling it the Credit Card Competition Act. The problem with that is, when you have encrypted transactions and things, this bill is really meddling with the core infrastructure of our payments ecosystem.
yes, it
Um,
is,
and
yes,
this is something that has worked well for decades. It's like I'm not a fan of this regulation at all, but I mean, if you wanted to reduce the cost of interchange, do what the rest of the world has done and regulate the cost of interchange. It's what the Durbin
exactly,
Amendment did before. They just regulated the debit, interchange
right.
again. I'm not a fan of that, but I'm saying this whole Credit Card Competition Act is absolutely ridiculous.
Well,
And
well,
so,
it
you know.
and it just shows that, the lawmakers don't understand how the system works.
No, not at all. And I think it'll be even a bigger mess than the last Durbin Amendment that came
Oh
out.
yeah. Oh
So
yeah, definitely. And like we said, I mean, it's inching. Hopefully it won't make it. Hopefully they'll get their act together, and hopefully somebody will go up there and educate the lawmakers on why this is impractical.
yes,
But and frankly, in my mind, that's the ETA's job,
right, right,
or the ABA, the
right,
American Bankers Association, or
right.
the community bankers. But the bankers associations, besides just, they're besides doing, press releases and commercials and stuff like that, should be up on the Hill
Yes,
lobbying and explaining this to lawmakers.
agreed. All right, well, keep us posted on this one, Patty. What's our
Oh, I
second
will.
one?
I'm following this one close. So, Visa has announced a new program that helps businesses embed payments into their products and platforms.
Hmm.
It's called Visa Commercial Integrated Partners, and it aims to improve connectivity between financial technology firms and Visa commercial products through its commercial platform. Visa, in a press release, said it will make available advanced APIs to embed Visa products in business partners' applications and make these integrations available to its financial institution clients, allowing them to offer new seamless payment experiences to business customers.
So is that so, Patty? When you say that, if I'm understanding it right, it sounds like what you're saying is kind of like what Apple Pay and Google Wallet and some of these have done. Where again, I know it's not exactly the same thing, but where they've been able to store, like digitally store our card on our phone so that we can use it. You're
It's
saying that
kind of the
they're
same thing.
they're
Yeah,
providing
yeah.
APIs so that other technology solutions can do that type of thing.
And but this being for sort of commercial customers as opposed to retail
Oh,
customers.
I see. Okay, got it. All right. Okay.
Okay.
So instead of
So
consumers, this is aimed more at businesses.
right, right. So
Okay.
like one of the first products is called Car IQ, which is a leader in fleet and vehicle technology. I
Okay.
haven't heard of it, but that's how
Right.
they explain them. Um, it's enabling integration with the platform. Clients will be able to access Car IQ software from their business customers for their business customers and enable in-app payments with virtual cards at fuel providers without extensive supplier onboarding and development, which would
Very cool.
save a whole lot in terms of due diligence time, in terms of due diligence, integration work, and project management.
Right. Okay.
You know,
No, so basically you're saying this company sounds like they have a software to help you manage your fleet of trucks or whatever, and
right,
you can
right,
now give your truck, your truck drivers, they can have a virtual card to get fuel, that type of thing, and it's just kind of built into whatever the software is.
right, right.
Okay. Very cool.
Yeah, yeah. So this is a quote from Visa's head of commercial solutions. Visa Commercial Integrated Payments represents a significant step forward in our mission to empower financial technology providers and financial institutions with innovative digital payment solutions. The idea is that FIs can leverage Visa Commercial Integrated Payments to offer customers enhanced payment solutions. You know, not, in addition to the example I just gave, there's also, enterprise resource management type situations,
Sure.
expense management, um, mobile and vehicle apps. They can offer tokenization through virtual cards and more elaborate transaction
Cool.
controls.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So it's an interesting
Yeah, we'll see.
advance. I mean,
Yeah.
and what strikes me is that it sort of shows how Visa's just always a little bit ahead of the curve on these kinds of things.
Right. Right. That's how they keep their competitive edge for sure. So,
Yeah, for
okay.
sure.
Interesting. All right. What's our third one today?
Third one today is Nevada. The Nevada legislature is considering a bill that gives us to offer a special charter for banks that just handle payments. The charter is for payments banks.
Okay. Like sponsor banks.
Right, right. Allowing fintechs and others to access payment rails and help retailers reduce expenses is the way they explain it.
Interesting.
It would establish procedures for licensing retailers, payment processors, remittance companies, and others to apply as banks for direct access to U.S. payment systems like the ACH, FedWire, and FedNow.
Wow.
They would be prohibited from engaging in lending and lending related activities, and they would not have FDIC insurance.
Right.
The bill would also set a limit on merchant acquiring activity pricing to 25 basis points.
Hmm.
Several, this is not unique. I mean, there's several states that have special charters for banks.
Right. Right. Yeah.
You
Yeah,
know,
we were just talking about one a few weeks ago that Square was getting a charter from, or I guess it's Block now or something.
yeah.
Maybe I was reading about it, but yeah, I know they were getting a charter. It wasn't in Arizona though. I think can't remember which one it was in.
Now this is Nevada, close,
Right.
but right. Well, and last year I remember talking about this. Last year, Georgia granted a payment process, a bank charter to Fiserv.
Maybe that's what I'm thinking of. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I think that may be what, because we've talked about that.
Right.
So it's interesting. It's only in the early stages, but you can see how large retailers, would charter their own banks to bypass the traditional card rails,
Right. Right.
or at least bypass the pricing of traditional card
Right.
rails.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah,
Huh. Okay.
yeah,
Yeah. And again, I think it's just so interesting to me, all of it, because seeing how the industry is unfolding, it's kind of like opening up a bit more to where
right,
you used to be kind of the, old boys club to be able to do anything, to really have any kind of
right,
control over the
right.
process. And I think, fintech is upending that. And I think it'll be interesting to see, what options are available to fast growing fintech companies over the next 36 months. It'll be very interesting.
Yeah, and it's interesting. You put this against what's going on in Congress, right?
Right. Right.
I mean, the states again, as is often the case, the states are always just a little, are always ahead of Congress and of the
Sure.
House and Senate.
Right.
It- and that's because I think they have a closer relationship with the businesses and the banks in their
Well, and I
constituency.
also think it's how it should be, right? If there's a new idea, it's like, well, that idea may or may not be a good idea for all of the states, but it might be a good
Right.
idea for one of the states. And then when they test that out and that we see good results from it, then
Maybe
federally we
another state will
can,
do it.
yeah,
Right.
and then we can act, at a federal level. So it makes sense.
And
I
it,
think
I,
good.
I think I told you once before, and just to reiterate, way back in days when you might have only been a glimmer in your dad's eye, um, there were there was not interstate banking. Every bank had to be chartered in its
In
state.
one, right, right,
And then what they did is the states had compact. The first step to interstate banking was the state compact. So like New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut would allow branching between themselves.
right, right.
So I see something like this,
Hmm.
you know, that could lead potentially leading to
Right.
compacts.
Sure. As other states see what Nevada's doing, and hey, maybe this is working out well, and then they want to do
Yeah,
something
let's
different,
make a deal with Nevada, and we'll
Right,
let
right, right. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Cool. Good stuff. I think you said you had one more quick one for us today,
Yeah, I
right? Or
have
what?
one more quick one, and this comes from the UK,
Okay.
where the government has said it wants to end the quote wild west of unregulated POS borrowing that is buy now, pay later.
Okay.
According to the BBC, 11 million folks in the UK have used buy now, pay later in the past year, but there are fears that some are spending more than they can afford. So this new legislation, which is set to take effect next year, um, would require BNPL firms to follow consistent standards so shoppers know what they are signing up for, you know, that there are upfront checks to determine if they can afford the purchase, and directions on how consumers can get help if they need it.
Mm. Yeah, I like the first and third one, but the second one gets a little sticky to me. That's
That
like,
gets a little, yeah. What are upfront checks to determine,
eh,
if they can afford it? I mean,
right.
well, to me, that's actually a going to getting a credit report, isn't it?
Well, yeah, I mean, if that's what it is, I think the UK definitely has shown, issues in further regulation than maybe is necessary. I was listening to a podcast just recently, and one of the guys in the podcast. We were talking about AI and ChatGPT in particular, and ChatGPT 4.0 isn't available in the UK right now because the UK still has some kind of arbitrary AI regulation that makes it illegal to use that technology there.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Interesting.
and there's a lot of things like that. But yeah, I think they kind of, a lot of the stuff sounds good, and then you're like, yeah, okay, so I want the government to figure out whether or not I can afford something. Maybe
Right.
not. Maybe I'd rather have that freedom to myself still. But
Yeah.
obviously I go a little more on the conservative side of these things. That kind of stuff in particular always is like, just
Yeah, but
but
also just to play devil's advocate here,
yeah,
and we all know that I'm on the liberal side
right,
of
right. That's
things
why we have good
anyway.
conversations. Yeah,
Right. That's what I would. You're right. There are people who are not that savvy, you
sure.
know,
And
and who
they're
just
getting duped into making decisions that they shouldn't
and
make.
they keep doing these. I know people like that who
Right,
would just keep on doing these BNPLs, and they stack them all up, and you know, and then suddenly like they can't pay the rent.
right,
you
right,
know
right.
Actually, I had a tenant like that. um
Yeah, yeah,
she had all
right,
kinds of loans out, but she couldn't, and she
right.
couldn't pay the rent.
Yeah. Well, and hopefully, these lending companies will, especially BNPL, I hope over time, because you think about BNPL is probably going to be the first debt that you're going to default on. Like, in other words, if you have,
Right.
you're not,
Right.
you're going to pay your mortgage before you pay your BNPL, right? So
Of course.
hopefully it's expanded rapidly. There's been a lot of force behind it. Hopefully the market will take over there and BNPLs will start to see their default rates rise.
Oh, I
And
think they already are seeing their default
right.
rates rise. Yeah.
And as default rates rise, they should be making those corrections themselves to say, hold on, we have to be a little more cautious here, not because we want to restrict the freedom of somebody to borrow, but because there's a free market principle at play here of we want to get paid
Right.
back. And if we don't
Right.
think you can pay us back, we're not going to give you the money. That's how that, in my opinion, that's how that should work. That's,
And
when the government gets involved with saying, and let us tell you how to do that. It's like, I don't know that a bunch of, politicians are the best ones to help us figure out how to determine if somebody can afford a loan or not. I think I'd rather the free market and the company figure that one out.
you know what, James? That's where you and I agree.
Yeah.
Because I do think that this is definitely a free market kind of situation.
Yeah.
If these companies are smart enough, they're just not going to give the BNPL out
Right. It's like,
to
why would
certain
they? They
sectors.
know they're not going to get paid back. If they get too aggressive, they're going to not get paid back. Default rates rise, and then it's like, all right, we got to make
Right.
an adjustment. And
I
again, I agree, there are going to be some people who get hurt along the way in that process for sure. Going to hurt their credit. It's going to, you know what I mean.
right, right.
But these things have a way of correcting themselves, and I think when you overcorrect, it's pretty easy to do that and make some stupid mistakes, on the political side. So
I saw a little snippet recently that Klarna was, lost a ton of money on defaults in the
yep.
last quarter.
Oh yeah,
So,
absolutely.
yeah,
They'll start making adjustments. So.
yeah. So,
Well, Patty, thank you so much for all the research you do, keeping us informed about the industry. We always appreciate the insights, and thank you for all you do.
thank you, James.